Doing well. Morning, Steve Carter.
Morning, y'all. Gary, Reed, Clark, Bill.
Hey, how y'all
Hey,
doing?
Steve.
I'll turn my camera on for a little bit and say good morning to everybody.
Morning.
Lynn.
Hey, I'm gonna have to turn it off in a little bit because it slows everything down for me.
Dan Siegel, Frank Rogers.
Sure.
Yeah.
You'll be on camera, off
You can
camera.
leave it zoomed in on you though, in case I make any faces.
I know how to work it, so I can switch it over to you whenever you're ready to speak.
Do what? Switch over me, what?
Be right back.
Morning, Frank.
I think we're at the appointed time. It looks like, according to my screen, we've got all the authority members here. Does that appear to be correct to you? All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to this meeting of the Region 2000 Service Authority. First order of business is public comment. Has anyone indicated a desire or registered to offer public comment?
We haven't received anything at this time.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone on the call who would like to offer comment? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on. Our next order of business is the consideration of the April 28 meeting minutes. What is the pleasure of the authority on those?
I'll move approval.
Motion, I got a second?
Second.
Thank you. So we got a motion and a second. All those in favor? Oh, well, all right, let's do a roll call. We're electronic. Sorry, Mr. Wodica,
Aye.
Carter,
Yes.
Ms. Adams,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Thank you all. Okay, so next order of business is the consideration and adoption of the FY22 budget. Clark, looks like you're up for that one.
Okay, I'll start off with the budget summary. We've got a revenue tonnage projection of 192,886 tons. That's the same as last year. And revenue has not changed. Operating expenses and total expenses are no change from last year. We've got a proposed employee merit-based salary increase. We're recommending a 5% increase. That the last meeting we were asked to determine how to balance the budget with no tipping fee increase. So we've looked at a few line items to reduce the amount of our budget to prevent a tipping fee increase and include the 5% salary increase. Those are listed on the budget summary. We've also were able to utilize the sale of 3 pieces of equipment to lower the equipment reserve contribution this year to further reduce expenses to maintain a $30.25 tipping fee. Those at the time we wrote this budget summary, that equipment was on an auction site. Those auctions have ended. We were expecting about $80,000, which is what we reduced the reserve contribution to bring the total expenses back down so that we could maintain a level tipping fee. The bids came in for those 3 pieces of equipment, and we actually received $180,000 for that equipment. Typically in the past, we haven't budgeted that surplus equipment sales, and we've just added it in to the reserve when we receive the funds. But this year we could use some of that to keep our tipping fee reduced to the current level. There is an additional $100,000 which we will be putting into the equipment reserve reserve funds. Leads us to the disposal cost of service, which will be $30.25 cents. That's no increase over this current fiscal year. The market rate will be $40.25 per ton, which is again no increase over the previous budget presentation. I did include, just for information purposes, our historical tipping fees. Our last increase was in FY18 4 years ago. And before that, it was in FY15. So we've only had one increase in the last 7 years and 2 in the last 8. So we are keeping our tipping fees very low. Again, we've got the airspace reserve contribution will be $1,219,761. We have there's a note on the budget summary. We have completed the capacity analysis that we'll be talking about in item number 5. I will mention that the capacity analysis, we also included a calculation of when we would expect to reach the volume that was included in the original member use agreement. We have fine-tuned that date to September 1st of this calendar year. After September 1st, the excess revenue distribution that was defined in the member use agreement will cease, and the financial policies will govern past September 1st of this year, which the current financial policy states that the authority would reinvest 25% of the airspace reserve funds back into operations, and that 75% would be distributed to Campbell County. And that begins September 1st. That's all I have on the budget. Any questions?
I have a question for Bill.
Yes.
So with respect to what Clark just said about the financial policy, my question is, does the member use agreement govern the distribution of those excess revenues?
No, the excess revenues end when capacity is reached, and it's a financial policy of the board that governs after that was adopted several years ago.
What are then the revenues that are being distributed if they're not excess revenues?
They are what was excess revenue under the excess revenue calculation.
So what are they now?
Well, now they're excess revenue.
But the member use agreement doesn't govern the distribution of excess revenues?
It does. It says that there's a definition of excess revenue, which everybody understands, and then it's optional on the part of the localities. At least that's the, of the board. That's the language that's the subject of the lawsuit. But it's the same definition going forward after September 1st under the financial policy. At 75% gets distributed to Campbell, and 25% goes into operating.
Subject to a vote?
No, subject to the policy. The policy is in place. If the board wants to change the policy, the board can change the policy by vote, but the policy is still in place. So you don't have to vote. You don't have to vote to distribute them. You have to vote to change the policy.
Why does the policy overrule the member use agreement?
It doesn't overrule it. The member use agreement doesn't really speak to what happens with that revenue after the excess revenue is distributed. And so the financial policy basically takes the place of the service agreement as far as that distribution is concerned.
It's still excess revenue.
It's not excess revenue because excess revenue under the service agreement goes away. It's what was excess revenue that is now authority funds that the policy of the board determined how those were to be allocated.
Could I interject with another question, Mr. Hefty?
Mm-hmm.
Even if I understand, even if we follow Mr. Carter's line of logic there, that it's still excess revenues and defined as it currently is under the member use agreement, does not the member use agreement define those excess revenues as dollars that shall be distributed to Lynchburg and Campbell?
If it's excess revenue, but excess revenue, as I understand it, goes away as a concept when capacity is reached. And the financial policy basically took the place of the excess revenue calculation.
Yeah, I would ask for something in writing about that then, because it's still excess revenue. I don't see how you can say it goes away. It's not going away. It's still going to be collected. And as far as I'm concerned, it's still subject to a vote.
I think that directing staff accordingly would at least require consensus of the board, or are you asking that independent, Steve?
Well, I'm asking that independently.
So I wonder if, well, because I'm curious how this is germane to the current conversation FY22 budget.
Well, it was brought up during the discussion. So I asked the question.
Fair point.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
may I speak? Is that okay?
I'm sorry, Susan.
If this is an unanswered question and there's a concern about the FY22 budget, I would be inclined to think possibly we should not vote on it today.
I would like to add that money has not been included in the FY22 budget. It's subject to the final audit of FY22, so that money won't be factored in to the authority's operating budget until FY23.
So if the excess revenue just is going to end in September or whatever you reported, Clark, then what's being collected after that?
The same $10 differential over the market rate versus the cost of the member rate.
How's it being budgeted then for possible distribution after FY22?
I think that when we developed the policy, the 25% was baked in toward closure, post-closure, maybe repayment of the internal loan. But I think Rosalie and Clark could better respond to that, because I think at some point in the past we were looking at a rate increase, and rather than doing that, we recognized that at some point in the future the authority would receive that 25% share, and those dollars could be used to offset some of those expenses. But I'll let staff clean that up, Steve. That's just my general recollection.
Yeah, that's my question.
And that is correct. The $10 differential, once excess revenue is reached, 75% goes to the host, and 25% goes back into I want to say good of the cause, so to speak. It gets rolled in as funds to, it's a line item, but it gets used to reduce the expenses.
So let me, if I may, Frank, reiterate my question.
Please.
If excess revenues, as we have previously known them or whatever, are ending in September, then after FY '22 and the audit comes in for FY '22, is there a prorated distribution of excess revenues to this subject to approval to Lynchburg and Campbell, and the difference between the total revenue collected, excess revenue collected, is then distributed on a 75% basis? How's that going to work?
Well, July and August would fall under the old member use, well, not the old, but the member use agreement definitions, and then moving past September 1st would fall under the financial policies.
And where does it say that?
The member use agreement defined an original volume when we formed the authority, and then a few years later, that's when we went through the lateral expansion, which is where will the theoretical volume of that begins in September 1st.
So why are you calling it in the budget excess revenue if it's not? If it's not all excess revenue?
Well, we actually call it airspace reserve.
Yeah. Why do you call it that?
That's just what I believe, if I remember correctly, the board asked us to use that term.
Steve, what would you like it to be called?
Budget surplus. Or excess revenue, preferably. Then it would be subject to the member use agreement. I mean, what is it if it's not excess revenue? It's a surplus, which is what excess revenue is.
My understanding is that under the member use agreement, the excess revenue are tied to the timeline when we exhaust the original airspace. I think that's the link between the excess revenue and the member use agreement. The suggestion here is that airspace is consumed by September, and so the excess revenues are then governed by the previously approved financial policy.
Well, I'll just note my vote ahead of the vote on the budget will be no till this is cleared up.
Even though, Steve, the excess revenue dollars are not included in the proposed budget.
Well, they're shown in the budget.
It's just shown in a line item that we've always included as airspace reserve.
Are you going to collect them as revenues?
It's the same as the revenues that have been collected and not yet paid to Lynchburg and Campbell. They're there, but they're not spent.
But they're still being shown as a budgetary revenue.
Yes.
So just noting my vote will be no.
This is Gary. Mr. Carter, just make sure that it's clear that the revenue that we collect from the businesses starting in September of 2021 is not included in the 2021 budget, 21-22 budget. That'll be included in 22-23 budget. So anything that's shown in, you ready? Are you ready?
Well, no, if excess revenue ends in September, then what is it after that then? You're saying it's still the same thing, Gary.
The member use agreement declared that there are a certain quantity of monies that were to be distributed and based on the airspace. And we reached that at 1st September. So we have a new, something new called, whether it's called excess revenue or not.
Yeah, what is
September, but it's not included in the 21-22 budget. It's in.
Where is it shown?
It'll be in the 22-23 budget, and we don't budget for that till next year.
I don't agree with you. Let me just say that.
Mr. Chairman, I think, may I speak?
Yes, please.
We have litigation against the authority to define the term excess revenues. And possibly that will provide clarification on some of the discussion that we're currently involved in. Also, excess revenue, my understanding, exists after all of your operational budget costs are absorbed. And included in that are some of these special funds that money could be utilized to contribute more to closure, post-closure, or some of the special funds that's in place. So we're not exactly sure what that amount of the excess revenue would be, as well as the pro forma is indicating it's going to be about $900,000 a year. So I'm not exactly sure how we can work within the confines of that number until there is some clarification provided.
Yeah, thank you. I think everybody's getting wrapped around the definition of excess revenues. Really, we've got an adopted policy that dictates the actions of the authority. And it doesn't even take effect until the fall. So the deliberation before us is what to do with the budget, which is funded with our member tipping fee, and then the commercial tonnage, but for the $10 increase, which goes into the pot for excess revenue, airspace reserve, whatever staff just called it. So I think you can do both. I think you can have a conversation about that and compliance with our policy and still contemplate the budget that's before us.
And it would be helpful if Mr. Hefty could provide some written clarification on that so that we all know within what confines we're working.
So
I'll be glad to if majority of the board wants me to do that.
So can somebody clearly state the question we're posing to Mr. Hefty, because I am not confused about the new policy.
The question that I have is why, or does the member use agreement govern for distribution of excess revenues over the policy or distribution of excess revenues?
And the answer is the excess revenue as a defined term in the service agreement runs out September 1st. The money that was excess revenue is distributed pursuant to the policy that the board adopted.
What's it called? I don't recall. I didn't look at it. I apologize for that. What is it called in the financial policy?
It's called excess revenues in there also, isn't it?
I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know what exactly it says.
I do.
Who is that?
I'm sorry, this is Susan. Once the current airspace is consumed, the authority will distribute 75% of excess revenue to the current landfill host, and 25% will be retained for use for future planning.
Yeah, so I guess how does the excess revenue go away when the policy says it doesn't?
Because the service agreement says that excess revenue under the service agreement goes away when the landfill reaches capacity. I mean, whatever you want to call it after that point, Steve, you can call it. In the policy, it's called excess revenue.
The landfill hasn't
same,
reached
it's
capacity.
determined the same way. It's the same exact calculation.
Then the distribution should be voted on. If it's everything
Well,
other than what you're saying.
The policy,
Written clarification.
Okay.
So that we can provide that to our attorneys as well.
Yeah, that's where I'm wondering, you know, I don't need the clarification. And I wonder if it's clarification that's needed, maybe the individual attorneys from the member jurisdictions ought to pursue that.
I already have, and mine's different from Mr. Hefty, so that's why we need to know the authority.
Yeah, Nelson's attorney says the member use agreement governs over a policy.
I do appreciate that it was mentioned that Mr. Hefty doesn't address a question unless it's the entire board's desire, because in the past, there's been some decisions made or discussions made that didn't involve the entire authority board members. So I do appreciate the fact now that we are working off of a consensus of the board.
It's up to the board to make that decision. I mean, I just gave you the answer that's my answer, which is that regardless of what you call it, the financial policy is in effect until there's a vote of 3 members of the board to change that financial policy. You know, I can understand that your attorneys may differ with that. And so, you know, we'll have another argument similar to the one that's in court right now, and you can add that to the court case if anybody wants to.
Isn't that how it naturally plays out? The authority complies with its policy. If members suggest that the authority is in default, they pursue that course of action accordingly?
Yes.
Okay, so we have an adopted policy and a course of action. If we pursue that course of action and members think we're in default, they have recourse, right?
They do.
So, and again, I'm a little bit at a loss as to tying this. I appreciate staff putting it on our radar because the capacity is consumed this fall, right? I think that's the big takeaway. But I am struggling to link it to our immediate action on the proposed budget. So that being the case, we have a budget before us. We've received staff's presentation. Steve, I appreciate you submitting a number of questions. I think those responses went out. Hopefully they were satisfactory. And I'm just wondering at this point what the authority's pleasure on the proposed budget is.
Oh, I also have comment about the responses to the questions, if I may.
Hey, we're all here. Let's have it.
Yeah, okay, great. So the response that Mr. Christie included, which was his memo from whenever it was about aerospace and all that, I take issue with that. There are subsequent documents from Burns and McDonnell, or whatever their name was then, and SAIC, subsequent reports to the authority that clearly, very clearly define what landfill capacity and capacity is, shows measurements for those capacities and puts a value to them. The term that Gary uses in his memo says discount. If you look at the actual reports, there's a depreciation factor. There wasn't any discount. But in any event, I just will say that, again, for the record, I do not agree with Mr. Christie's memo trying to justify excess revenues as airspace. Totally disagree, and that was just conjured up as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Steve. No one on the meeting will be surprised to know that I absolutely have a different opinion and disagree. I think Mr. Christie's memo is further evidence of the clear understanding of authority members over time that airspace was not paid for at the onset. I think Mr. Cunningham subsequently even acknowledged that the use of the term in the documents was a poor use of the word, that the airspace was not paid for. The whole concept was to pay for the airspace over time so that you didn't incur the financial hit early on. So you and I have a difference of opinion. I appreciated the memo being included because it's a good refresher that airspace was not already paid for. But again, I don't know that that's germane to the immediate consideration of the budget, but you did ask.
Well, it was part of my question. So just for Mr. Wudica's benefit, if I may, if you read subsequent to the reference to a report that Gary has in his memo at the subsequent reports from R.W. Beck, City of Lynchburg Assets and Liabilities, which was January 9th, 2009, subsequent to the report Gary cited in his memo. And then again, Final report, Campbell County Assets and Liabilities Summary, December 2011, you clearly see that it substantiates what I just tried to say. Okay, sorry, I've said
And
enough.
again, just that is not accurate either. Mr. Carter has a perspective and he's put blinders on. And I appreciate that he would say the same of me. But I think for the record, since he's entering it, I have to equally enter the opposing view that that letter does not, in fact, validate Mr. Carter's assertion in any way. And I think Mr. Christie's memo attempts to explain why it doesn't. So again, I bring us back to consideration of the budget. What's the pleasure of the authority?
My retort is, you're right, it attempts to justify it.
And you and I should spend time out because we could wordsmith and banter back and forth all day. But we're here today.
May I ask a question about what Mr. Christie's professional opinion, what's his basis for that? Is he an attorney or consultant? What exactly gives him the authority to make that interpretation?
So I'm sorry, Susan, I just want to make sure I understand the question. Is your question, what was Mr. Christie's authority for composing the memo?
Has his interpretation being the expert opinion?
Ready?
Mr. Chairman, I think with that, I have to say, I think we need to probably retain some civility among ourselves. I think we all know what Mr. Christie's qualifications are. And I think we all know where we are on this issue. I don't think that's appropriate.
Well, that may be an opinion, but the question was addressed to Mr. Christie, I do believe, or the chairman.
That's fine.
Chairman, I wrote the memo based on Mr. Carter's inquiries and from my experience from the beginning of the authority and the research through the documents. So it's my opinion from the experience of having participated in the creation and the progress of the authority through the years.
As I recall, was also rooted in the founding documents and subsequent communications with consultants and professionals in the field. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I assisted with the writing of that memo as well.
I think that's all good to know. I think the memo is helpful to have. I think everyone should read the memo. But I think the authority needs a budget to keep operating. And I would like to see what the authority's pleasure is on that for the coming fiscal year. Again, we've received staff's presentation. As far as I know, all the budget related questions that have been submitted have been asked and answered. So what's our pleasure today?
I'm sorry, Frank, can I ask one more question really quickly?
Of course, that's what we're here to do.
So I was just wondering about the tipping fee. I was wondering if there had ever been a consideration of creating sort of an automatic escalator in the tipping fee so that there was a little bit of predictive, allowed us to predict a little bit more. I mean, I think we can all appreciate that a long-term non-escalation of the tipping fee is not a sustainable practice in the long run. I'm just wondering if there's ever been any thought about doing sort of small increases over time rather than large increases.
Yeah, fair question. I don't know that I recall any of those conversations. Of course, Mr. Carter has been here since the initiation of the authority. Steve, was that ever contemplated?
I thought Clark is probably better suited to answer that question, but I thought that R.W. Beck, this is no longer, I guess, the consultant, did this pro forma estimate of the escalation of the tipping fees, required tipping fees over time. And that's been the reference Clark has used in developing the budget each year.
Yeah, we've used that as a guideline, and it's over time it's been very helpful and very accurate. And early on, we did go through some smaller incremental tipping fee increases. But as you see from the chart that I included in the budget summary, about 6 or 8 years ago, we started trying to keep the tipping fee level. And then every few years we get hit with, the requirement that we do need to have a jump in the tipping fees. But yeah, early on, we did, it wasn't any policy or anything, but it was more of an incremental approach. But we've kind of gotten away from that.
Yeah, just a thought, just for the future, maybe we can think about.
Yeah, I have a comment. Mr. Rogers, may I make a comment?
Yeah, the chair acknowledges the representative from Nelson County.
Thank you. So I'll just make reference to one of the responses that I received, we all received from the questions I submitted. This excess revenue distribution, if not for it, our tipping fee for members could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 or so. So Reed, I hope you'll take that in consideration. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I also take into consideration the capacity that Lynchburg brought to the table when we started before this.
Yeah, which you were paid for.
Here we go, loop-de-loo, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you for the question, Reed. Anybody want to make a motion on the budget?
I'll move approval.
All right, we've got a motion to approve the budget as presented today. Is there a second? I will second it to move it to discussion. Any additional discussion on the budget? All right, hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mrs. Adams?
No,
I'm sorry, that was a no, Susan?
that was a no, yes.
Thank you. No, yes, gotcha.
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
No,
Mr. Wodica?
Aye.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to go with the no's. Staff, we don't have a budget, so we're going to need to regroup and figure out what we do from here. I'm getting stunned silence in the Zoom, so let's move on to the next agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't realize that was a question presented to the board. I would suggest that we revisit the discussion with the attorney to provide some written clarifications, and maybe it'd be a little easier to move forward with the budget.
Thank you, Mrs. Adams. Again, I don't need the attorney to spend his time on that. I'm good. I understand. I'm interested in getting the budget adopted under terms the authority can concur with. So happy to meet again whenever staff is ready to revisit it. I'm not sure what it will take to satisfy the authority because I did not hear any concerns about the substance of the budget proposal in terms of line item expenditures, but more around the definition and the implications of existing authority policy. So I'm not sure what staff can do with that action from the authority so that when we get back together, we're all more satisfied. And I don't candidly think an opinion from the authority's attorney when he's already answered the question today will change my perspective in a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So I think we've put staff in a tough position here because we've taken action with no direction that they can take to correct the situation.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your comments, and I realize the budget will not go into effect till July 1, so that will give us some time to work through some of these questions. At the same time, I do differ from your opinion about Mr. Hefty's interpretation. I think we've operated off of verbal comments in the past, and for some reason, those are forgotten, and that's why I would appreciate it in writing going forward. It is a change of policy for the new budget year. I was not here in 2016 when, or whatever year that policy was adopted, so I don't know any backstory on that. So I would appreciate anything that could be offered, and I would also appreciate legal interpretation of what that policy means.
So, Mr. Hefty, what I heard was that was for you to document the comments you've made today as to that policy. And I do think that's some additional clarification for staff as to what you can offer in terms of background on the policy. As I recall, the policy was crafted at the time the lateral expansion in Campbell was contemplated as a means to continue to recognize the imposition on the host community, but also return some of those dollars to the authority for the collective benefit and improvement of the operation. So, I would respectfully say, Ms. Allen, it's not a change in policy. It would just be complying with policy to stay the course where we're at. So, again.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think it is. We are operating under new policy effective in September. And it is different because Mr. Hefty said the MOU doesn't exist anymore as far as excess revenues, and now we have a financial policy in place. So I don't know the backstory, just like I was told the acquisition of the Bennett property, that the Board of Supervisors of Campbell County would approve the zoning and the landfill could expand. But now, I don't know if that was a discussion or not. That's hearsay.
Yeah, I do. I was present.
Yeah, I think Mr. Carter's the only one who was present.
Yeah, I don't have a problem if Mr. Hefty documents in writing his opinion.
I will get an answer to the board members in writing.
Are there other questions that would help alleviate concerns of authority members such that we could improve the budget to a point where it is adequate for consideration and subsequent adoption? I'm pushing only because, the days are ticking off here to the new fiscal year. So is all we're waiting on Mr. Hefty's background on the financial policies and documentation of the opinion he stated today, or are there other questions you'd like staff to return with?
I would like staff to return with the reduced commercial tipping fee in relation to operational needs.
I'm not sure I understand that request, Steve. Can you just tell me where you're going? You want to take the $10 off? You want to have it the same as the members, or you want a reduction in it, or what are you contemplating there?
I would be fine with taking it all off if they, if Clark's determines that the authority can operate without it, or whatever amount is required to make sure the budget balances at the end of the fiscal year.
Well, that's always the cost of service. We don't include the airspace reserve or excess revenue money in our operations. So the cost of service, which is the member tipping fee, balances the budget.
Which was sort of my point earlier, to try to separate the conversation from consideration of the budget. Because even if they take the $10 off in terms of the commercial markup, that then subsequently becomes excess revenue, whether it's under the member use agreement or the policy, is not incorporated into the ongoing operations of the authority. So if Mr. Carter's suggestion is just to bring us a proposal that doesn't include those dollars, you're essentially going to bring us the same budget back. It would be to the benefit of the commercial haulers in Lynchburg and Campbell, who pay the $10 markup.
I'd still like to see it without, well, then I want to see the $10 excess fee removed. That's my position.
But Steve, again, I'm not trying to be obtuse here. It'll be the same budget, right?
Right. Then why do we have a public hearing to include that fee if it doesn't go towards the authority and its operations and how it distributes its revenues?
Because it is contemplated in the member use agreement and in the subsequent policy.
Well,
all right. I think, okay, that you've given staff direction. My staff, maybe you're hearing something different, but my expectation then is we'll get the same budget back, but we'll also have a memo from Mr. Hefty.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Carter may have a point. If we didn't have that $10 excess what we're calling that excess revenue, that additional $10, it would put us more in a competitive market to maybe increase our number of contracts, as well as, I have a huge respect for all three of you gentlemen. And if it would make all this controversy go away, if that $10 fee would make it go away, I'm all for it.
Me too.
My caution is, especially going forward, that the at least the 25% does get rolled into the operation costs and reduces closure and those kinds of things. The amount that the Services Authority has picked up is, put in our operating reserve. So it's, sitting there for that use. So,
Well, to me, again, I'm sorry I keep interrupting. Well, I'm really not sorry, but to me, what you said, Rosalie, is a contradiction. If it's the $10 fee is not a part of the budget, but now when it needs to be part of budget, that's just fine.
no, Steve, I said going forward
FY23,
into
Oh,
FY23.
not
Okay.
this year, FY23.
Where excess revenues as defined in policy and the member use agreement are no longer excess revenues, right? Yeah, sorry.
Staff got
I think we can
adequate
move on.
clarity on the requests of the authority. Obviously, we're not acting on the budget again tonight, this afternoon. I just want to be comfortable that by the time we reconvene, authority members feel like they've got the information they want. So, all right.
I don't know.
So our next topic we'll be excited to hear is a capacity analysis. Who's on first for that one?
I'll start off. We recently did a comprehensive survey of the landfill, which was used for a couple of reasons. One was to get ready for the engineering and design of the Phase 5 project. The other reason was to look at the capacity that's available to the authority with what's in our permit, and also to determine that September 1st date. So anyway, I'll focus on the capacity and the life of the landfill. Lynn has done a analysis using that survey information, and it's looking like we will reach the permitted capacity sometime in early 2029, January or so in 2029. And of course, that date was then used to update our pro forma that you were sent a copy of the other day, which shows that we will be, after this year, we will be looking at a, I believe it was around a $6 tipping fee increase. And that was due to a couple of different reasons, mainly due to the increased cost of the Phase 5 construction project. We redid the, Lynn redid the opinion of probable cost for that project for our financing. And we've also included the continuation of our landfill gas collection system in the Phase 5 financing, and the costs have continued to just go up as we're experiencing a lot of things right now. And also we're based on the previous survey that was done a few years ago, with the landfill capacity, the life of the landfill is a year or two less than we originally had based on the last survey. And we're attributing most of that to the reduction in our compaction rate. It's not a huge reduction, but when you look at it over time, it does make a difference in our landfill life. And I think we're starting to see the impacts of losing the Griffin pipe or the industrial slag from the pipe company in Lynchburg. I think it's starting to show up in our compaction rates. We were going about 1,500. Now we're looking at about 1,300. Lynn, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you summarized it really well, Clark. We've also talked a little bit about your tonnage has increased since some of those original evaluations were completed. And we've also talked about the fact that it's still a young landfill and it's going to keep settling as the operations keep working the waste in there. So I would expect possibly some of the density to go back up a little bit, but I agree. It's a lot related to the loss of the slag and Griffin pipe, which was tonnage coming in. It wasn't taking up much space. It was getting paid, it was creating revenues, and it was worked into the calculations. So, and we've assumed in our evaluation no major change in any of the tonnages at this point for that evaluation through January. So Clark, I really don't have much to add. You summarized it pretty well, and the memo lays it out. I think in pretty simple terms, but I could answer any questions if needed.
Okay, thank you both very much. So the takeaway is the landfill's done in 2029, right?
At this point.
I have a couple of questions. Did the projection on, I heard you say we didn't change any assumptions on tonnage, so this didn't factor in. Somebody's on the call. If you can hit mute, there's a lot of background noise coming in. You didn't change any of the tonnage projections, but we know there's a transfer site in our region coming online, so you did not factor in any tonnage being directed away from the authority in this capacity analysis?
Not in this particular capacity analysis. We are looking at factoring that in, and we can have that discussion at the appropriate time or right now, whatever the board's pleasure is. But this particular document does not have any reduction in tonnage based on any waste diversion from the region's regional landfill. But we are looking at the implications of what would happen if we did, if that did happen and we did see a diversion of a significant amount of commercial tonnage away from the region. We have looked at those scenarios.
Okay. And then at one point in time, will the authority be briefed on what's involved with shutdown, right? So we're out of space in 2029. That's really not far from now. What's the process for the authority winding down? What are the regulatory requirements for the authority post 2029? When will we receive a staff report that says, hey, here's everything from here's when we're out, here's when we're, where we move to what post-closure inspections, here's where we liquidate whatever assets, auction equipment. When do we get a sense of what that timeline and process would look like?
Well, we can begin that process now on looking at what needs to be done, what needs to happen, what has to happen. There's a couple of different of items we need to look at. We've got engineering, we've got regulatory, we got financial. Yeah, we in the pro forma sort of has some of that already worked into it on what happens with the financial part of it. We could begin working on that that document that kind of puts it all together and summarizes everything so that we can start getting our arms wrapped around what needs to happen in the next 6 or 9 years. We did do that study back in 2030. back in about 4 or 5 years ago, we called it the 2030 plan, because at that time we were looking at 2030 as our shutdown. That document's been discussed in numerous board meetings, and it's available online. And so we had some options that had been evaluated. So I guess, number one, we would just need to decide, where we want to go as an authority moving forward. Then come up with an action plan.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I'm interested in seeing, what that conversation from the previous document looks like, because I think with the exception of Appomattox, the other 3 members need to get on with planning for, not that Appomattox may not still be interested in chatting with us, but we need to get on with planning what we do with our waste in the post-2029 timeline. And as I look at what we do for Campbell, it would also be nice to know how that runs concurrent with any timelines around the regional authorities' ultimate closeout. So I would welcome that conversation sooner rather than later, just because permitting and all those sorts of things can be very time consuming, as everybody on the meeting knows. Sorry, I hopped right in with questions. Other questions based on the capacity analysis?
No, Mr. Chairman, but I would like to make a comment that Appomattox has a solution for 2029, and it's called a transfer station. So if the authority would like to entertain that discussion with County Waste, it may be a good time to start having that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great offer. I appreciate that. Mr. Carter?
I think in addition to what Mr. Rogers just suggested, that, as Clark referenced, I believe the authority has done 2 studies of the future of the landfill. And in both, the results of both those studies is, correct me if I'm wrong, Clark, was the best option moving forward would be to move to the Bennett property and continue the landfill, the authority's operations as a landfill operator. So in addition to this is what we do when it's all over, I think we should revisit as well. These are the potential benefits of moving to the Bennett property, where, as I said, both studies we've done previously, the landfill option is always number 1. So from my perspective, the authority, all members benefit the most from taking a hard look at expanding the landfill, if Mr. Rogers could convince his board to acquiesce to the special use permit.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Steve. Certainly, in our line of work, we give our elected bodies all the options. So I think it's a point well made. We'll need to revisit all the options. Certainly Campbell, through even formal board action, has gotten on record that really don't have much of an appetite for that expansion. Regrettably, over the past 2 years, with some of the differences of opinion at the authority, I think we've probably moved further away from a point where we would have an appetite for that sort of collaborative approach. But your point's well taken. That data needs to be put in front of the elected body so that they can weigh it against other options. Absolutely fair point.
Thank you.
Any other questions related to the capacity analysis? All right, if there are not any, then let's go to phase 5 financing, please.
We passed a reimbursement resolution for phase 5 a few meetings ago. We have begun incurring engineering expenses for phase 5 project. Now it's time to start talking about the schedule for phase 5 and also the financing for phase 5, our final phase, as defined in our permit. I will turn it over to Ted and Dan. We have started communicating with them about the financing process. Lynn has, as we mentioned earlier, has prepared the opinion of probable cost for the phase 5 project, or the final phase project. And and she's also prepared a schedule for us to follow to get phase 5 opened by sometime in early 2023. So anyway, I'll turn it over to Ted and Dan, and Lynn, you could interject as needed.
Thanks, Clark. This is Ted Cole. I'll jump in first, and then I know Dan and Lynn will have some things to add. Based on our preliminary discussion, we understand there's work is being completed to get to a better estimate of the project cost. Lynn can speak to that and where we are. I also understand the schedule has the project being bid in I think it's the spring of 2022. And so from a financing perspective, our thoughts are, we could wait until the spring of 22 when the bids are in hand. We know how much money we need, and we do the borrowing at that time. Alternatively, if there's a desire to explore borrowing earlier, we absolutely can do that. That would mean we would be borrowing based on estimates rather than known costs. I think we can navigate that. And by navigate, I mean, if we were to borrow earlier before the project is bid, what if bids come in higher and we didn't borrow enough? There'll have to be a plan B to resolve that scenario. On the flip side, what if we borrow more or end up borrowing more than the bids come in? We just need to have a contingency plan on how to spend any excess borrowed funds. So at least from where I sit on the financing, it's a decision of the board to decide whether you all want to wait for the project bids to come in and borrow or consider borrowing earlier. We can run those scenarios and ultimately run those through the pro forma to see how borrowing earlier versus later impacts cash flows by fiscal year. And we can also run some sensitivity analysis that says, what's the sensitivity of a 0.5% change in rate? In other words, if we borrow now versus waiting, what happens if we wait, but rates go higher or rates go lower? How does that flow through the pro forma? So I think you've got a lot of latitude as a board to develop a plan as it relates to the borrowing timing. And maybe with that, I'll pause. Maybe there's a question, or Dan and or Lynn want to jump in with other thoughts or items to discuss.
Yeah. So the resolution really that's in your package simply allowed us to go forward to look at options. It doesn't really commit to a particular option or commit to a particular amount. The thought was that we could do that analysis. We could go out and check with the market. Because the market rates at the moment seem pretty attractive, they've been in a low point for a while, and of course Ted can speak to that more. It seemed like it might be useful to go ahead and start that process, come back with some options, and then let the board decide at that point what they want to do. But this resolution really simply does that, authorizes staff and the professionals to go out and look at different options and do an evaluation with a recommendation for the authority board.
Yeah, the only thing I would jump in and say too is there is a huge volatility in landfill construction costs right now, and it's been flatlined for years. But with the some of the pandemic issues per the membrane companies, some of the issues with Texas and the freeze and the power, we have opened 3 bids where the membrane, which is a good solid chunk of the cost of any construction, have just skyrocketed. In fact, contractors are refusing to guarantee their unit prices for more than like 60 days. So whether that volatility is going to stay or not, but when we redid the opinion of probable cost, we did go ahead and increase our contingency because of this incredible volatility, and we've always been waiting for it. And now suddenly those membrane prices are up, and whether they'll come back down doesn't tend to happen, or continue to rise. And from an engineering perspective, that's why our construction costs did increase since the beginning of the year. Things have really been changing, and that's why Ted's looking at costs that are higher than we had talked about earlier. It's just a crazy market out there right now.
Okay, thank you. So the resolution for our consideration enables staff to move forward and get some financial planning models pulled together, even in light of the variability about estimated construction costs. What would be the timeline for pulling those options together? Since I have a feeling we're going to be meeting in a few weeks.
I'll leave that to Ted.
I think we probably should be able to meet that timetable. I mean, there'll be estimates, right? We're not talking about going out and requesting proposals, right? We're talking about running scenarios, so that that should be fine to be able to have it ready for your next meeting. Not sure about the agenda deadline for that meeting. Worst case, we get it closer to the meeting itself, but we'll do our very best to get it finished and in an agenda packet whenever that might go out. Is there I've been listening here along the way. Is there a known next meeting date yet, or is that to be determined?
So I would say that is to be determined, Ted, and I don't want to speak for the whole authority. I'm conflicted here because I'm interested in moving forward quickly because I understand rates are good. Similarly, I'm not in any great rush because the price of everything is awful. So just want to, sort of keep the conversation in front of us so that we can try our best, and I know you always do, to hit the right gate in terms of timing this. So, but that's more than you asked. You asked if we have a date certain for our next meeting, and not yet, no.
All right. Well, I'm pretty comfortable if it's a couple weeks out, we should be able to get good estimates together for that meeting.
I think we should just wait to the next meeting.
Yeah, I just think, are we going to consider a budget before July 1? So my thought was, maybe have this conversation along with that, just in the interest of time. Again, I'm not suggesting it has to happen by any date certain, just keeping the conversation in front of us. Okay, any other questions on the resolution? All right, so hearing none, I'll move approval of the resolution authorizing action to determine options and recommendations for financing the scheduled Phase 5 installation and construction of a new cell and the related improvements at the Livestock Road facility. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we've got a motion and a second. Any additional discussion?
Okay, I'm sorry. I just ask a question real quick.
Sure.
So, forgive me because this is still pretty new to this group, but what is the need to adopt a resolution authorizing staff to get options put together? Why do we have to do that?
Why didn't they just do that as a matter of course?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It probably has nothing to do with your tenure on the authority.
Yeah, me too.
I'm just going along with it, whatever. If that's what they need, I'm happy to give it. Dan, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, no, we just felt like that it would make more sense for the authority to give us direction to go forward rather than just for us to go, spending a lot of time. That was it, just to get the direction. And if not, then that's fine too.
Well, and in fairness to staff, I think in the past, some of us have had some concerns about what roads they've begun traveling down without checking up with the authority. So out of an abundance of caution, I think this is an appropriate step, but it's a good question.
Frank, may
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
I'm not necessarily opposed to this, but I don't see the urgency to do this today. As everyone has said, I know we're in a very good interest climate, but on the other hand, things could change significantly in a matter of weeks, months, or whatever. We're not going to do this till next year. How urgent is this?
Mr. Chairman, can I respond a little bit?
Please do.
Yeah, so the idea, it's a great question, Mr. Carter. The idea was to see what the options are, see what the sensitivity is from Davenport's analysis of the market and the sensitivity of rates change dramatically, and to really make the decision whether to go forward on the financing sooner rather than later, again, depending on the sensitivity in the market. And what you're seeing obviously on a cost standpoint, but the cost thing, I'm not sure you can control much at this point, but that was the concept, to let you make the decision on whether, do I wait till December? Do I wait till next March? I mean, you're going to be spending money with the design and all along. So you'll want to spend, you're going to use money to do the design part of it, but in doing all the regulatory efforts you have to do. The construction, I think, under that schedule was sometime next spring would start. So you kind of have that leeway of when you want to go. And it's really a question of, do you think rates are going to go up, and is it worthwhile just to lock it in? That's all. Just to give you the information.
Frank, I have a follow-up question.
Yes, sir, please.
So, Dan, what is the sensitivity of the market, the amenability of potential financial entities to loan the authority money, or is it the sensitivity of the interest rate climate, which, if you guys can calculate that correctly, maybe you should do something else. I don't know,
Ted, maybe I'll let you speak to that.
Well, yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, we certainly know we've had success in the past on more than one occasion borrowing through banks. We have decided previously on a couple of occasions not to utilize VRA because you might recall, among other things, they felt like they needed flow control type of issues in place in order to be comfortable with the lending. So we've gone with banks historically. Have no reason to expect that banks wouldn't be available this go round, but we are in a situation, obviously there's discord with this authority. There's a lawsuit that I think could have an impact on whether somebody wants to participate in a loan. I don't know that. We won't know that till we put it out there. But my thought was on the sensitivity is, there's a trade-off. Let's just say hypothetically you borrow now at known rates and your payments are going to start that much sooner and they're going to be flowing through your pro forma that much earlier, as opposed to borrowing later. So your payments start later, but the thought would be to measure not only how does borrowing now versus later flow through the pro forma in terms of payments at the same borrowing rate, but how does that change when you make an assumption about waiting to do a borrowing and if rates move up or down? So there's a couple of different things I guess we would try to be calculating in this exercise to give you better information with which to make a decision about borrow now or borrow later. Not, my thought was less so about, does anybody want to lend you money? I think the only real way to do that is to go forward with an RFP.
Right.
But yeah, so Mr. Carter, so for
Wait,
instance,
so
if it was just a 50 basis point difference, what would that mean? Or if it,
no, that was my question.
That's
Is
it.
that what the pro forma, my second question, gonna show us today's rates versus what the rates could be over the time horizon when we borrow? So for comparative purposes, I mean, I get that. We would do that too here. I'm not opposed to it. It's just, man, I don't know. It seems premature to me, but.
Yeah, I just like having the information sooner rather than later, and it's nothing we have to act on. It's just information
yeah.
for consideration. So, you know.
Just prolonging the agony.
Yes, so Steve, I hear what you're saying for sure. I get that. I do also feel like that there's, I think it brings a tremendous amount of value, that information. And it's not that analysis can't be updated in the future, right? And I think getting that out ahead of time, I've found tremendous value with the city in doing that. And we tend to borrow a lot of money. So, more so than
Yeah, I have to say, Ted, I didn't think the banks would not be amenable to loan us money. Maybe because of the lawsuit. Hopefully that'll be, well, I don't know. Hopefully that'll be resolved soon. That's not in our court over here in Nelson. So
It certainly could be. I'm always optimistic. Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote on the resolution. Susan,
Yes.
Steve,
yes,
Reed,
yes.
and the chair votes yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you all. All right, so next up, Clark, your report, sir.
Yeah, you've got the tonnage chart that I've included in the agenda packet. The March and April, we did see quite a jump in tonnage. May's tracking higher as well. So we are tracking better than budget right now for tonnage, which is also means revenue. Any questions on the tonnage report? The second item is the odor complaint report. We've had 3 complaints since our last meeting, and they all came from the same address. And that's all I have for the director's report.
Thank you, Clark. Can you remind me the duration of time over which we've had the 3 complaints? You say since our last meeting, was that?
Yeah, I believe those came May 6th, 7th, and May 6th, 7th, and 15th.
Okay. So like when they run together on the 6th and 7th, should I be concerned that there's a system issue? Maybe the odor vapor system had a malfunction or something, or is this just sort of incidental?
We always make sure that whenever a complaint is received, we just confirm that all of our systems are up and running, and they have been. We haven't had any disruptions in the odor controls or the flares, any significant disruptions. So most likely it was an intermittent odor issue.
Thank you. Other questions for Clark in response to the director's report?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Clark.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that it was 3 complaints from one address. Was this a residential area?
Yes.
Okay, so only 1 complainant in a residential area.
That's right.
Okay, so obviously it wasn't a huge problem then. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Clark on director's report? Okay, that brings us to other business from members or staff. So I'll open the floor up. Anything from authority members or staff at this time?
Frank, I may,
Sure.
so I'm sure many of you read, city has announced a new city manager to start August 4th. We're excited to have him come. I'm very excited for him to come, as you can imagine. So I hope you'll welcome Mr. Benda as he arrives, coming from Norfolk. So brings a great deal of experience and expertise, and will do a great job, I'm sure. Look forward to working with him.
Thank you, Mr. Wadika. We appreciate all that you've done and highly respect you. And I received good news the other day that you were staying on board as the deputy.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
Thank you for all you've done.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Yeah, I would echo that, Reed. Look forward to meeting Mr. Benda, but very appreciative of all the work you've done in your interim role. And in addition to staying on as deputy, I hope that Mr. Benda will see the wisdom of leaving you on the service authority as the city's representative. Who would not want to enjoy this time and time again? So yeah, look forward to meeting them. And I echo Susan's appreciation for your efforts. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, I echo both Frank and Susan's comments, Reed. I really enjoyed working with you too. I just wish you'd come over from the dark side, of course, you know. If I may, Frank, one last comment from me, I hope.
Yes, sir.
I just want to express my appreciation to you for your conduct of these meetings. I really appreciate the latitude you afford us, and thank you very much for that.
I appreciate that, Steve. As you know, we all have strongly held opinions and they don't always align, but I appreciate that this is a place where we can have some of that conversation. So thank you very much for that.
And I echo Mr. Carter's comments, Mr. Chairman. You may not think so, but we're very appreciative of you too and your leadership.
Thank you, Susan. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Anything else from staff? All right, that's all the time I'm going to give you to come up with something. All right, so we've got our next meeting was tentatively, well, I don't even think it was tentative, was lined up for July 28th. I presume we want to get together before July 1 just to revisit Mr. Hefty's opinion and action on the budget. Is that everyone's understanding? I don't know, do we do a continuing resolution and just keep going until, how does this work? I've not done this before, so I'd be interested in staff giving us some input and direction on that. And you don't have to right now, but we're going to need a game plan, I guess would be my point.
You need to adopt the budget by July 1st of some kind to spend some money after July 1st.
Yeah, so Mr. Hefty, I'll just ask this, and we're not in the same room, so please understand it's meant respectfully. Or what?
Or the administration doesn't have any authority to spend any money.
Okay. All right, so I'm speaking for the authority here. I'm assuming we're all just going to look to staff to get some dates together and reconvene a meeting. Is that fair for everybody?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think we had that same situation last year, and there was some kind of rumor mill out to staff members that they would lose their jobs, and I certainly don't want that to occur this year because I do think we can meet some kind of resolution in June, and if the authority had authorized Mr. Hefty to put that in writing prior to the vote, it may have gone just a little bit differently anyway.
Yeah, good point. Well, it's always difficult to have these hard conversations and stay sensitive to staff. So I would also amplify Mrs. Adams' concern that staff understand that this is sort of the course of the authority's business, looking to get a budget done that we can all agree to. That's what we're here to do. It was just taking a little longer than it might have in the past. I think some of those same concerns can be raised when we start to have capacity analysis, 2029, that sort of thing. And so I hope that everybody will collectively be reassuring staff that there is no imminent job loss, happening in the next 30 days. So good point. And we'll look to see what we can do to get a budget done.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? All right. Do we need a motion to adjourn? Or do we all just unplug?
I move that we adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I second it. I'm sure everyone's in favor. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we'll adjourn until the next meeting, date to be determined. Thank you all.
Thank you.